Congratulations!
Sometimes it's what's not said that echoes the loudest. Jeff Bezos' $50 million Venetian wedding on June 27, 2025 dazzled the world. Oprah, Kardashians, private jets, and protestors in speedboats. But while Venice was ablaze, his ex-wife's silence spoke volumes. In this video, we're breaking down 7 subtle but powerful moves MacKenzie Scott made before, during, and after the wedding. Moments that may have rewritten the entire narrative without a single word. You'll learn how timing, donation records, celebrity praise, and one very strategic silence created a quiet counterpunch that might have said more than any headline ever could. Because this wasn't just a wedding. This was a game of legacy.
All those Kardashians. There's Oprah, Gayle, low-key Leonardo DiCaprio, and Tom Brady, and Orlando Bloom.
And someone may have just played it perfectly. Number 1. The spectacle that made Venice blink. On June 27, 2025, Venice didn't just host a wedding. It hosted the wedding. Think Gatsby meets Google Calendar, minus the subtlety. Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder once mocked for laughing like a Bond villain and building a rocket shaped like an innuendo, officially married Lauren Sánchez, the former news anchor turned helicopter pilot turned billionaire fiancé. It was an event so extravagant, the city of canals might still be recovering. The price tag? Estimated at $50 million. Maybe more, depending on whether or not you count the emotional damage to Venetian locals who watched their quiet streets turn into a billionaire's red carpet runway.
There is a small problem though. Many of the locals don't want to welcome the happy couple.
The guest list included everyone from Oprah to Kim Kardashian to Leonardo DiCaprio, who, let's be honest, probably wasn't even the most expensive item there. One tabloid claimed guests were transported via gondolas with private security details and opera singers floating alongside. Because if you're going to flex with live arias echoing down 1,500-year-old corridors. Meanwhile, the city? Less impressed.
And some Venetians aren't happy about it. The No Space for Bezos campaign.
Local activists staged symbolic protests by paddling through canals with inflatable crocodiles. Yes, crocodiles. It was less Vogue Italy, more eco-horror short film. Protesters rang church bells in frustration, waved anti-wealth banners, and accused the event of disrupting daily life for thousands of Venetians. Tourists were blocked, streets were sealed, and some locals were reportedly kicked out of their own neighborhoods. All for a wedding most of them weren't even invited to.
Game, please! Game! Bella game!
Or, in some cases, weren't allowed to walk past. But let's take a step back. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a message. A public broadcast of power, luxury, and control. It screamed, "We made it." It whispered, "We don't care if you're watching, we want you to." And just like that, Jeff Bezos re-entered the cultural conversation, not as a CEO or innovator, but as a spectacle. And while the world buzzed about dress designers, drones, and DiCaprio's tux, one person didn't post, didn't comment, didn't even blink. MacKenzie Scott, Bezos' ex-wife, remained completely silent, at least on the surface. Because what happened around the same time, quiet donations, calculated timing, and eerily poetic symbolism, suggests she might have been playing a very different game. And that's where things start to get interesting. Number 2, the silence that wasn't so silent. MacKenzie Scott didn't tweet. She didn't post an Instagram story with a cryptic quote about self-worth or healing. No red carpet reaction. No subtle shade in a podcast. Nothing. And that's exactly what made people start paying attention. Because when your billionaire ex-husband throws a wedding the size of a minor Marvel movie premiere, complete with super yachts, helicopters, and protesters in the streets, you'd expect some kind of response. Even a passive-aggressive repost of a Maya Angelou quote would have done the trick. But MacKenzie? She went radio silent. Now here's the thing. Silence from most people is just silence. But silence from MacKenzie Scott, the 4th richest woman in the world and a master of quiet power moves? That's something else entirely. Because this isn't the first time she's stayed quiet while making waves. It's her signature move. Pull back, stay low, then drop $1 billion like it's spare change. And around the time of Bezos' wedding, that move might have been playing out again. In the days surrounding the Venetian spectacle, MacKenzie made 0 public appearances. But eagle-eyed observers noticed something strange. Several quiet updates to the database tracking her donations. A few obscure nonprofits listed her as a benefactor around late June. Nothing flashy. No press release. Just updated numbers. A whisper in the noise. That's when people started asking, was this her way of responding? Because the timing was suspiciously poetic. Bezos makes headlines for throwing a wedding most people couldn't afford to attend. And MacKenzie seemingly continues her mission of giving away her fortune to causes that barely make the news. It's not a rebuttal. It's a contrast. A study in opposites. Where he broadcasts, she erases. Where he builds rockets, she funds food banks. Where he celebrates with celebrity guests and camera crews, she quietly vanishes, leaving only receipts behind. And maybe that's the real point here. Maybe MacKenzie didn't need to say anything at all. Maybe the silence was the message, a calm, quiet reminder of who she is and who she's not. But what if that silence was hiding something more? Because in just a moment, we're going to look at what happened right after that wedding. And it's the kind of timing that makes you wonder if the quietest voice might have been planning the boldest move all along. Number 3, the timing that was just a little too perfect. Let's talk about billionaires and timing. Because when someone who casually gives away billions of dollars decides to make a few key donations, quietly, subtly, right around the time their ex is throwing a global spectacle, that's not coincidence. That's choreography. See, MacKenzie Scott has already given away over $19 billion since her divorce from Bezos. That's billion, with a B, to over 2,000 nonprofits, covering everything from education and healthcare to equity and justice initiatives. And she's done it with such a low profile, she could have been donating in a cloak with night vision goggles. But here's where it gets interesting. Around the same time Bezos and Sánchez were finalizing their guest list and floral arrangements, several new donation entries started appearing in her foundation's database. No headlines, no press statements, just a handful of anonymous gifts that lined up almost exactly with the wedding week. And while MacKenzie hasn't confirmed anything, because of course she hasn't, that's kind of the whole point. Her silence doesn't mean she's inactive. It just means she prefers spreadsheets over spotlights. But when those spreadsheets start moving while your ex-husband is trending worldwide for floating through Venice in a tux, you have to ask, is this a coincidence or a counterpunch? Let's not forget, back in 2022, she donated 2 Beverly Hills mansions, together worth over $55 million to charity. Just like that, gone. She practically gave away the kind of real estate most celebrities flex about owning. That wasn't a one-time fluke. That was a pattern. So when these new updates showed up, some people didn't just nod, they raised eyebrows. And the speculation? It spread fast. Reddit threads lit up. Twitter users quietly shared screenshots. A few influencers even joked. Bezos gave Lauren a yacht. MacKenzie gave humanity a future. But here's where it gets wild. There's still no concrete proof that these donations were timed as a response, which makes them even more mysterious, more powerful. Because the truth is, if you can't tell whether someone is reacting or just being themselves, maybe that's the ultimate flex. And yet, the public was starting to pick sides. Loud versus quiet, gold versus goodwill, yacht parties versus clean water. And soon, the headlines weren't just about Venice anymore. Because next, we'll see how the world started responding to her, and why some celebrities were silently cheering from the sidelines. Number 4, when celebrities started picking sides. It didn't take long for the internet to split into 2 very loud, very opinionated camps. Team Extravaganza versus Team Elegance. And no surprise here. Some public figures quietly made their allegiance known. And it wasn't exactly leaning yacht side. While Jeff and Lauren were busy throwing the wedding of the decade, complete with helicopters circling historic bell towers and security guards keeping locals behind ropes, some celebrities started hinting that the whole thing felt a little much. Okay, more than a little. A lot much. Charlize Theron didn't mince words. When asked about the wedding, she allegedly replied with 3 simple words. They suck. Bye. Direct, efficient, and very much on brand. Rosanna Arquette called Lauren Sánchez's gown tacky, while Katie Couric joked that she's seen more tasteful events thrown in college dorm hallways. And in a twist of poetic timing, guess who was getting praised while all this was happening? That's right, MacKenzie Scott. While Bezos' name trended alongside terms like tone deaf and why are there crocodiles in the canals, MacKenzie's name started popping up in a very different kind of context. Mia Farrow tweeted, "MacKenzie Scott is just amazing. The impact she's having on the world is beautiful." Olivia Munn jumped in too. Truly incredible woman. We need more of her. No champagne towers. No viral clips of her slow dancing on a yacht deck. Just quiet, precise acknowledgement from people who seem to be subtly cheering her on. And to be fair, this wasn't some massive Hollywood campaign. Nobody launched a hashtag war or started burning Bezos merch in the streets. But when you have A-list names chiming in with admiration while your ex is throwing what looks like a Bond villain's retirement party, you can't help but notice the contrast. One camp threw a party so big it made headlines across Europe. The other continued giving away money so quietly, it also made headlines, just for completely different reasons. And slowly, the narrative shifted. Bezos' wedding stopped being just a wedding. It became a mirror, a cultural reflection of wealth, power, taste, and perhaps a reminder that class can't be rented by the hour. But MacKenzie's move wasn't over yet, because what came next wasn't just a vibe shift. It was a complete reframe of who people saw as the real winner. And trust me, this next chapter might flip everything you thought you knew. Number 5, wealth versus humility. Who really wore it better? Let's be honest. No one expected Jeff Bezos to walk down the aisle in a modest courthouse ceremony with sheet cake and folding chairs. The man built Amazon. He builds rockets for fun. He's worth nearly $200 billion. Modesty isn't exactly part of his brand package. But what made this wedding more than just another celebrity spectacle was the sharp contrast playing out in real time. Because while Jeff and Lauren were hosting a floating luxury pageant through the canals of Venice, MacKenzie Scott was redefining what it means to be powerful without being loud. This wasn't just a matter of taste. It was a clash of ideologies. Bezos flaunted his status through glitz and gold, the yachts, the gowns, the guest list. His wedding looked like it was sponsored by luxury brands and ego. You could practically hear the tuxedos screaming, "We have arrived." MacKenzie, meanwhile, kept doing what she's been doing since their divorce, giving. Quietly, strategically, relentlessly. Her approach to wealth has been almost monastic. No press tours, no selfies with celebrities, just donation receipts and nonprofit impact reports. And here's the wild part. Despite all of Bezos' noise, it's MacKenzie who's earned a kind of cult-like admiration. People don't just respect her, they root for her. She's become this soft-spoken symbol of grace and groundedness in a world obsessed with visibility. That contrast created a ripple, because suddenly the wedding didn't feel like just a celebration. It started to feel like an overcompensation. A spectacle trying a little too hard to say, "Look how happy we are," while the rest of the world quietly tilted its head and said, "Are you though?" Let's be clear, both of them are unimaginably wealthy. Both of them live in worlds most people can't even dream of. But the way they carry that wealth, that's the difference. Bezos turned his into a spotlight. MacKenzie turned hers into a lantern. And this quiet battle of legacy was starting to get interesting. Because behind all the headlines and gowns and gondolas, there was still one more mystery people couldn't stop whispering about. Was MacKenzie just doing what she's always done? Or was she, in her own way, responding? Because the next part of this story might suggest she wasn't just giving. She might have been sending a very specific message, without ever saying a word. Number 6, the whisper campaign no one saw coming. By now, the world had watched the wedding, weighed the silence, and started quietly drawing lines. But then came the part that really got people speculating. Because something about MacKenzie Scott's timing, her donations, and the sudden resurgence of praise around her didn't feel random. At all. Some fans online started to call it a whisper campaign. Not because anyone said anything out loud, but because of how loud the silence became. Reddit threads popped up, pointing out the strange timing of MacKenzie's most recent gifts. Twitter users stitched together donation records with the precision of internet detectives who've watched one too many episodes of Succession. Was it a coincidence that nonprofits posted, "Thank you," updates the same week Jeff's wedding overtook global headlines? Or that praise for MacKenzie started trending within hours of Lauren Sánchez's dress being roasted on Instagram? One user joked, "MacKenzie just activated billionaire stealth mode," while another asked, "Is she the Batman of philanthropy?" Which, honestly, would explain a lot. And then there were the rumors. Nothing confirmed, but the kind of quiet leaks that fuel documentaries years later. Whispers that some of the organizations MacKenzie donated to had previously been turned down for Amazon funding. Murmurs that she'd selected causes specifically outside of Bezos' known philanthropic interests. A few people even theorized she timed her donations to hit news cycles the moment wedding photos dropped. Of course, none of this is proven. That's the beauty of a whisper campaign. You can't trace it, but you feel it. And the effect? Devastatingly elegant. While Bezos threw a wedding meant to be unforgettable, MacKenzie dropped breadcrumbs of quiet power, one donation at a time. And it worked. Suddenly, she was back in the conversation, without ever demanding to be. The media noticed. Fans noticed. Even celebrities noticed. But here's the twist. Was this all intentional, or just MacKenzie being MacKenzie? Because if she was sending a message, it was executed flawlessly. No drama. No public jabs. Just a billionaire giving away homes and changing lives while her ex rode through Venice on a floating parade float. And yet, there's still one question lingering like fog on the canal. Was this a coincidence, or was this checkmate? Because in our final chapter, we're going to confront the real question behind all of this. What if silence was always the loudest move on the board? Number 7, the final move, when silence becomes strategy. Here's the thing about silence. It's only powerful when it's intentional. And when it comes to MacKenzie Scott, nothing she does feels accidental. By now, we've watched the contrast play out like a psychological thriller in slow motion. One ex spends $50 million turning Venice into a billionaire's fairy tale. The other disappears into the shadows and quietly gives away enough money to reshape entire communities. But the final move? It wasn't the donations. It wasn't the praise. It wasn't even the rumors of perfectly timed generosity. It was the way MacKenzie Scott didn't flinch. Not once. Not when the photos dropped. Not when the headline screamed, Bezos weds in billionaire bash. Not when the world assumed she might respond. She just didn't. And that somehow said everything. Because this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about perception, reputation, power. It was about who defines the legacy after the split. And while Jeff Bezos was showing the world he'd moved on with a bang, MacKenzie Scott was quietly proving she never had to make a sound to be heard. Think about it. No exclusive interviews. No tell-all memoirs. No reaction videos. Just action. Just math. Just receipts. Her silence wasn't passive. It was engineered. It was curated. And it forced people to look at the contrast for what it really was. Not just wealth versus humility, but noise versus impact. Because in the court of public opinion, you can't always buy grace. And while Bezos had the budget, MacKenzie had the blueprint. She gave the world a masterclass in restraint, and it worked. The narrative shifted. The sympathy leaned. And even though no one said it outright, the unspoken feeling was clear. She won. Not in a petty way. Not in a headline-grabbing way. But in the way that matters most. And here's what makes it all so hauntingly poetic. Maybe she didn't need to say anything. Because when you move with purpose and you give with meaning, and you live like legacy is more important than limelight, you let the world write the story for you. And that brings us to the final twist. One that makes this tale more than just gossip, more than just headlines. Because what if the quietest character in the story was always the one writing the ending? Let's talk about that. So in the end, Jeff Bezos gave the world a wedding to remember. But MacKenzie Scott gave the world a reason to think. No speeches. No gowns. Just a quiet reminder that not all power needs a spotlight. Was her silence a statement? A strategy? Or just who she's always been? That's the mystery. One built on whispers, not fireworks. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real legacy. What do you think? Did she outplay the spectacle, or simply ignore it? Let the comments decide.